I think back to a number of years ago when we had Hurricane Harvey come in, right? Hit the Gulf Coast around the Houston area, extensive flooding. The use of aviation assets at that time was tremendous, mainly on the manned aviation side, right? So many hoist rescues that were occurring at that time, and the use of UAS at that point really had not evolved yet to what we know it as of today. Really, we took some of the lessons from that and have started to build what we have now for disaster response with UAS, and that really starts with the coordination and the planning before any of these situations happen. We do a lot of work with our manned assets, all the manned aviation air crews, for preparation for these types of disasters, whether it be a hurricane, whether it be extensive flooding. We've been dealing with a lot of that this year here in Texas, or even wildfires. So, when it comes to UAS, it's really figuring out where they're going to play a role in that disaster response, right? Is it going to be pre-staging? Is it going to get assets out there ready to go whenever that disaster hits and in the event of a hurricane? Or is it going to be something that, we need to plan for some mapping, right? Photogrammetry of disaster, of damage areas after the fact. And then everything in between, right? So, we've got, natural disaster. We have a hurricane that comes through. We have flooding. There's going to be manned assets that are going out there to deploy. But then how do we incorporate with them, right? That's the big the big question. How do you safely get unmanned aircraft and manned aviation in that same airspace to work together and to work together safely, right? That's the key component. So it's a lot of coordination. We can dive a little bit deeper into the coordination we have here in Texas if you want to, but that's really the big part of it is communication, coordination, and then planning prior to.
I guess what I would want to know is, how did you guys fine tune what your current day TTPs are? Did you have to learn the hard way in some areas, and what were those areas? And have you figured out how to build some efficiencies in, perhaps? Can you speak to either of those?
Yeah, and I think you're right. Figuring out what works and what doesn't comes with failures, right? You have those situations that occur. You try to deploy people out, and things don't go as planned, right? So you make adjustments. We I guess one of the big things that has helped us when it comes to these types of responses and planning for them is actually doing live training, right? We have an annual event here in Texas we call SAR. It's a search and rescue exercise. It's where we actually do a full-scale, full-day live exercise with manned and unmanned aircraft working together, live victims, live hoist rescues, and figuring out, hey, what is it going to take to put these assets in this environment and to be able to do it safely? It's the coordination on the back end with all of the crews and all the resources that are coordinating the response, all the resources that are sending the assets out there, and having that direct communication to make sure that we can safely integrate those together. So. What was the last part of your question on the?
So, as you're figuring it out, and as you are learning by doing, you'll hear me say that often because I fully subscribe to that process. Have you figured out how to do things better? Maybe you started out doing it the hard way because really it was the only way you knew, but over time, you've been able to build in some efficiencies into your processes. Do any come to mind?
Well, you think back in the beginning, it was everybody kind of for themselves, right? You had something happen, and you would have 20 different agencies that had assets out there, and everybody was doing their own thing. That was probably one of the biggest challenges, is wrangling everybody together to have one unified response rather than 20 different agencies doing their own thing with no coordination.
How
I
did you
think one
do
of the
that?
yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think one of the biggest things that has helped us with that is having a statewide coordination group. Charles can speak to this as well under drone responders, and that's kind of where we have evolved into is within Texas, our Tex group working group, public safety working group, coordination group under drone responders. We started this out, a few years back, just as our own little group. We stood up as the Texas Public Safety UAS working group, but it was a way to get all of these people together to be able to coordinate and plan in advance so that we knew when something like this happens, how are we going to respond and how are we going to respond together rather than, multiple individual agencies doing their own thing. So that has been a huge change in how we look at these things moving forward. Is it has to be a unified response rather than everybody doing their own objectives and missions.
I wanted to highlight something, if I could. One of the things that we're starting to see that's really important is how we deal with our responses at the local level. Let's forget a big disaster for a minute. Is that now we're starting to have multiple public safety agencies in a locality that have drones. We have state agencies that have drones. We have federal agencies that have drones. We have news media agencies that have drones. So one of the things that I recently did was put together a document because we had this situation in Charlottesville where we had a department that had a drone and had been flying for quite a while, and they were asked to come in a standoff situation, and they were flying and doing observations. Then we had another agency that came in that just recently got a drone and said, hey, this would be a great time for us to fly. So they started flying, but the others didn't know they were flying. And it got to a point where we almost had a conflict between those two drones. Nothing bad intended, but it's one of those things that now we have a new world we're in. So I put together an airspace coordination document or SOP to put out that would highlight how we deal with these situations. It says if we have any kind of aviation asset that's implemented, that we indicate that it's an aviation incident. And that we then have an airspace coordinator who starts coordinating the airspace to make sure we don't have any conflict between drones or between other medical, police, helicopters, or whomever must be there. We had early conversations with FEMA trying to get UAS into the incident command system a number of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and they were telling us it wasn't really needed. We do need it because if you have any significant incident, you're going to have a handful of drones. From people that have official agencies to the beyond that of the people that are there with the clueless, the careless, the curious, the criminal that are going to play into this whole mix. So we got to start doing something a little bit different every day, as well as in these disasters. And disasters compound the issue even much more.
So a question for Charles and Aaron then. So let's say I'm a different law enforcement agency. I go buy a drone, or where do I start? Where do let's say that there's an overlapping, maybe jurisdictional issue, because obviously you saw that there was some stovepipe information or something going on that needed to be that coordination, that additional communication to happen. How do you begin that process? Who do you contact? Like, can you walk us through how that evolved?
Well, we do our best here in Texas to as best we can speak with every agency that is trying to either stand up or that is operating drones. The fortunate thing with Texas DPS, I don't know of those that are watching or listening know much about our program, but we have a very large UAS program across the state of Texas. We've got almost 400 drone pilots right now that are spread out across the state under our program, which means we have resources all over the state. And all of those resources are in different parts, speaking with different people, working with different jurisdictions, and building those relationships. And that's really where it starts. It starts with knowing the people within your area that are already doing this, right? we've talked to many agencies that come to us and like, hey, we want to start a drone program. Well, what do you want to do with it? Well, we don't know. We just want to start a drone program because it's the next cool thing, right? And what we try to tell them, that's not the reason to have a drone program. You need to figure out what you're going to do with it. But aside from that, that's where it starts, though. It starts with talking to the people that are already doing this and learning from them, learning from the mistakes they've made, so that it makes it that much easier for you when you do decide to stand up that program, right? So it starts with the understanding of who is in your area, who is already operating, and how can they assist you in, the questions you have and what you need to build your program up to wherever you want it to be.
Yeah, I'll just add that one of the things we created in cooperation with Esri and NASA was our dashboard. And our dashboard is an opportunity for agencies to enter their information, and they can filter by state so they can see who's around them. And it tells, how many how many pilots they have, what aircraft they're flying, what missions they fly. Because as Aaron mentioned, it's really important to find out what you can do with the drones, because that really defines the aircraft you're going to buy. When you're looking at your geography, the types of missions, that determines the payloads that you're going to want to have. So talking to your other agencies, but I think that the power in this is getting the people to know that each other exist. Then you have opportunities for regional training. And that's what we're seeing with these state groups they're starting to form, is that we, as you all know, we have a national conference every year. The problem is everybody can't travel to those national conferences. So we need to start taking this home, if you will, to the state levels, to where people can actually travel. In a lot of cases, they can drive to these conferences and come together as groups. So that's what we're hoping to do now. And so far, we've got Florida was first, Texas, Ohio, North Carolina, and we've got 2 others that are in discussions. And this is starting to just kind of take off on its own. But it's really learning from what others have done. And Michelle, you've heard this over and over again of people saying, just like Aaron said, I want a drone. We're going to get a drone. We're going to go do something. And you go, what? And they go, I don't know, but it's cool. Isn't that enough? And there's a lot that goes with it. So it's coming together as a group to learn from each other and know what's available.
And then just one other question. I really appreciate the information. And then for Aaron and Charles, one of the things I've been having a lot of conversations with is private security, leveraging drone technology for their own surveillance and perimeter, patrols and whatnot. Are they reaching out to the law enforcement community who has established drone programs to try and learn? Or on the flip side, are the police potentially reaching out to those entities and, trying to leverage maybe each other's equipment? I know there's a lot of ethical or legal maybe boundaries in sharing equipment like that, but having those resources available, especially in, a resource-rich area like Texas for oil, and you have Chevron and all these other entities who are concerned about drones and use the drones for security. But is that relationship happening as well? Is that communication kind of evolving too?
I would say yes. It's a little bit slower than with other public safety, but I would say yes, it is starting to. Just about week and a half, 2 weeks ago, we were at an event in Houston that really didn't have a whole lot to do with public safety, other than the fact that we were there with drone responders doing a co-located event. But it was an energy summit, right, relating to UAS or relating to robotics, right, and meeting a ton of people in the energy sector that are doing that exact same thing, right? They're building up a UAS program for, security or for, infrastructure inspection, or whatever it is at their locations. So you build a lot of good relationship with those folks. As far as the leveraging of technologies on the UAS side, I don't think that's really happening yet. And like you said, there are some considerations that you have to take into account there. But one of the other things that I think is starting to catch on a little bit more, and that's getting into the realm of the detection, right? Maybe leveraging some of the technologies that are going up for the detection of UAS around those facilities, and some information sharing from that aspect.
So I am getting called a lot by security. And they're calling because of seeing the expansion and the evolution of DFR, because they see the DFR is very, very similar to them being able to do remote piloting to facilitate that protection of the property, the perimeters. But what was interesting is I had one reach out to me to say, hey, we're looking at doing this at a particular facility for the security, but there have been conversations with the local law enforcement that they have an interest saying, hey, would you mind flying some of these areas that are high crime areas that are near your properties? So I think what you're going to start seeing is this drone as a service. And I know Michelle's been talking about this a lot, is that drone as a service is going to take hold because now we have DFR under Part 107, which is a total different animal, because before you had to be a public aircraft operation. So I think you're going to see, just like in the law enforcement, the same thing in the security realm because of the advantages it offers. And what's going to be interesting to see what comes with Part 108. That's the thing next, is because that could have a play into making this easier. Because, for example, we've got checklists now and all the stuff that really expedite the DFR waivers. If Part 108 comes in and says, okay, as long as you're doing these things, you can just go ahead and do it without doing a waiver, that's going to be a whole different increase in this. But we're seeing DFR increase exponentially. We went from 50 in 6 years to over 300 more in 2 months, if that gives you any idea of how things have changed.
Yeah, it does. I'm not sure, though, that we're still scratching the security itch for me, because I'm thinking about, those private security for distinguished visitors, VIPs. So those security details are top notch. They know what they're doing. They're highly paid for a reason. And we still don't have any language being considered that is outside of SLTT that considers their own responsibilities and how they can protect their clients.
Yeah.
So that's still a gray area for me that I wish we would have more conversation on, because I don't think that that's just because they aren't SLTT that they don't count, because they absolutely count. How do we wrap our head around giving them enabling capability at a reasonable level so they can still do their job?
Well, I think that's the same with counter UAS, Michelle. I think we would all agree that these facilities that are oil refineries or chemical plants or whatever that are in rural areas, one, we as SLTTs are not going to be able to protect those facilities
Right.
as these threats occur, and they need to have the ability to protect themselves based on the same rules, training, and certifications as law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Because just like we see now, we have threats and interest in larger events that are occurring, but the feds can't be in all these places.
Right.
And I'm sorry, we've been lucky. We have been very lucky, and it's not a matter of if, it's when. And I'm, somebody asked me the other day, if you were going to create havoc, what would you do? I'm not going to tell you here, because it would be something that would be maybe giving some idea that they haven't thought about. But there are ways that you could create a major havoc across a large section of the United States with very little effort.
Yes, sir. Yes.
This is an interesting conversation. I agree 100% everything you guys are saying, because it is. I mean, Securitas and Allied Universal, I mean, they provide the security for a lot of our national critical assets, oil refine, like you just said, Charles, and they're not being considered whatsoever in the legislation. And, police, while they do everything they possibly can, if there's an intruder in my house, the best line of defense is me. You know what I mean? Until police can respond, but they're going to respond after the fact that the thing that's going to happen's already happened, and so providing those entities who are on site all the time, 24/7, with the responsibility of protecting that location is going to be critical to defending against an attack. It's going to happen way too fast, unfortunately, for the police to do anything. And so you're right. It's something that should definitely be looked at.
And I'm afraid what's going to happen is it's going to take a disaster or an attack at one of those private facilities to prove that out,
right?
For it to change.
And that's
a stationary location.
Yeah.
So what about folks that are on the move?
The heck with them. The heck with them. No, I know. Tough.
So no, I'm being serious here. So we have private security entities whose sole responsibility, it's like the Secret Service for the private community, right? They're very well off. Like Aaron, you probably have a lot of high visibility celebrities that come to events. You probably, concerts, dignitaries. that's a level of security that's not being addressed in any language, and it's mobile. As they're moving, is there a drone that's stalking them? What do they do? Well, right now we know they have to call local law enforcement to come and see if they can find where the ground control station is and try and talk those folks, educate them. Well,
It's even worse than that, Michelle. Even if you find out who it is, you have no authority to do anything to them.
that's what I'm just saying. You got to educate them. But
Yeah, there's limited. I say there's limited. There are options out there legislatively. State statutes from state to state, depending on where you're at. There are certain things out there that law enforcement can do, but it is extremely limited. The other challenge that we have, and I speak to this quite often, is educating law enforcement on unmanned aircraft.
yeah,
Because when you think about law enforcement, there's a select few that actually understand what the drone laws within their state are, and they're normally the ones that are flying the drones. Your day-to-day patrol officers that would be responding to those events, they probably have no clue what an unmanned aircraft is, what the definition of it is, what laws exist that they can apply. So it's educating those folks within the state, within your jurisdiction, or your agency, as far as what they can and cannot do, what resources they have, or what tools they have in their tool belt for applying any of those laws for those situations. So I think that's really where it needs to start, is each of those states. I mean, I teach it here in Texas to a lot of our folks, but I talk about it at events in other states, but you have to have those individuals from state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, that have the understanding, that can go out there and teach that stuff to educate all those folks that would be responding to those situations.
Yeah, I want to reach out to Michelle and Brandon. I think Michelle, you heard me talk about this the other day about creating an ordinance, a model ordinance.
yeah,
To where we could say, let's figure out all the rules and regulations. Let's focus on the waivers over people, over moving vehicles, and BVLOS and TFRs, and let's put those into an ordinance to say you must be able to provide these things that show that you're able to do this, a waiver or whatever it is. And if you don't, that's a violation of ordinance. That way, we're not preempting airspace. We are using the existing rules, and we're really doing that. So, I'd like to work with you guys to see if we can maybe develop that model ordinance that we could test out somewhere.
Yeah, I'm game. I was curious, Charles and Aaron, do you think drone? So I'm not a cop, obviously. I've never gone through cop school or how that the academy, how that works. But I would imagine when you're in the academy, you learn the rules, laws, regulations of your particular state that you are supposed to be enforcing, right? So do you think they need to add that as part of the basic police education? Because every single cop's going to need to be aware of these drone regulations, not just the guys that are and ladies that are flying the drones, right? It needs to be all of them, because if they come across an operator in a park, they need to know what to ask. And then having those relationships with like the FSDO office and everything else, how to report, what to do, all that stuff.
I will speak from Texas, because I do not know how the peace officer certification is set up in other states. But I know for here in Texas, we do have a basic peace officer certification requirements under our licensing authority, which is TCOL. And there are certain courses, certain topics that have to be taught for a person to get certified as a peace officer. That they have to be taught and they have to be tested on. Drone laws is not one of them, right? And when I'll tell you, one of the challenges with this is the fact that this technology, this industry is moving so fast that it is moving faster than what legislation can keep up with. I think we all know that.
Welcome to our world, Aaron. We have been struggling with that for
Yeah,
15 years.
and I'll jump back real quick to what I was talking about with the course that I teach on enforcing drone laws in Texas. I talk about the fact that there are some statutes in Texas that have definitions related to aviation that have not been touched since 1994 or 1995. There's definitions in there that reference sections of federal law that hasn't existed since 94. I mean, it's so out of date, and trying to get legislation to catch up with that is a challenge from state to state, because every session there are certain priorities, right? We had, I don't know, somewhere around like 8,000 or 9,000 bills that were introduced this last legislative session for Texas, and there was only a few hundred that actually made it through, because things aren't prioritized. But back to your point, Brandon, yes, it's something that needs to be discussed. It is a topic that I have finally worked into our academy within Texas DPS. So it is at least a 2-hour block that I'm able to get. And I was fortunate to get 2 hours with them, because they're so strapped for time over a 6-month period. But absolutely, it's something that needs to be taught to these folks, just because it's a piece of technology out there that is advancing so rapidly. It's so common now. There's always going to be times where you're going to get a call that, hey, there's a drone flying over somebody's backyard. They called 911. They need an officer to go out there and handle it. What are you going to do? Do you know anything about that? So to your point, yes, it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and something that needs to be taught at that basic level, that beginning level.
And as Aaron mentions, there are some state and local laws. Like state laws, for example, say that you can't operate an aircraft in a hazardous way, that you can't interfere with incident operations of an emergency incident. The same thing with peeping Tom laws and harassment and those kind of things. Those are all things, but a lot of people don't realize that. In fact, the next piece that you run into is if you run into that and you try to go forward with that, like we did with the harassment stalking case in Rockingham County in Virginia, you've got the next level, the prosecutors and the judges, that when you bring this up, they go, huh? And so you have to walk it through and connect the dots of, okay, forget the drone for a minute. It's the behavior that's being done that we're trying to actually prosecute. And so you have to do an education process, not only of your police officers, but now you've got to do it of your prosecutors and your judges. And you've got to have your documentation so well spelled out that they get how that connects. So that's part of this whole process. But I think having some model ordinances that we could push forward that could maybe become universal, could cross all of the local jurisdictions, and then give everybody an easy path to deal with some of these issues.
I really like where you're going.
Yeah, I like that too.
We do have we still have some wrinkles that we need to iron out. Brandon and I were talking about one before we started today, and that's the TFR aspect. There might be other alternatives to continuingly characterizing drone operations as hazardous, because that's what TFRs are for, hazardous environments. So there are probably some other options there, but I really like this idea of trying to now get beyond how do we get a waiver to more enterprise enabling policy, and ordinances seem to be a logical step along that path.
But keep it narrow. Let's keep it narrow to where it's not trying to, because New Hampshire tried to codify the FAA rules as they are written. Right. And that becomes this really grandiose thing. Now, the precedence is, if you look at how that was done, if we look at Department of Transportation at the federal level, we have codified a lot of the rules, the transportation rules that regulate vehicles and transportation and that kind of stuff. So there is a precedence of how that could be done. But in that case, when they submitted it, AUVSI opposed it. Now, I'm sorry, but if a state wants to codify the rules that exist and they're not preempting anything, then you should be able to do that so that you actually have the enforcement capabilities. But on the other side of it, it becomes so broad that how many people are really going to understand it. But if we focus on some specific areas that are our problem areas that we could deal with easier and more effectively, that's kind of where my head is.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's about resource availability, right? Like the federal prosecution arm is not going to enforce through prosecution every single violation of a drone rule. It's just not going to. They don't have the time. I mean, it's just not possible. And you're talking about all federal law for their jurisdiction that they're in. So if someone goes in there, even if they violate a national security flight or airspace restriction, they have to measure that towards all their other priorities. So some way or shape or form to leverage the state's judicial system to get that in there, to expand that resource availability to actually apply some enforcement, I think is incredibly valuable and definitely needs to be looked at. Now that is a paradigm shift in how aviation law functions today, regulations, because it's a federal deal. But leveraging those SLTT resources and capabilities is something that's incredibly important. It should be peeled apart.
Look what you did to Charles.
I know.
Hey guys, actually it's good timing because we have another caller jumping in. I'll bring him on.
Hey,
hi, Zev. How are you doing?
Hi,
Hey
Zach.
guys, I'm good. How are y'all?
Good to see
Doing
you.
great. It's always good to have you joining in. And I think one thing, I know we've been having a good conversation here, but one reason Zev wanted to call in was to talk a little bit about the deconflicting the airspace. I don't know if that'd be something maybe we can pull in a little bit. Aaron, just maybe you could tell a little bit about in those disaster areas, what are you guys doing right now to deconflict the airspace, and we can maybe have Zev add some to that because that's where his expertise lies.
Yeah, one of the things that has been beneficial for us for that airspace deconfliction, if we're talking, manned versus unmanned, one is of course ADS-B data, and that gets you it gets you most of what's out there. But depending on the area you're in, if you go down to South Texas and work border operations with our drone folks, you will see that some Border Patrol aircraft that show up, they're not broadcasting. Right. There's other federal agencies that may not be broadcasting, and it's a challenge. Right. So, if we're referring to, disaster response, a lot of those folks are going to be broadcasting. So it's beneficial. But one of the big components that's helped us out is TAC. So Team Awareness Kit. I see Zev's background there. It looks like a nice map of from TAC. But yeah, it's that ability to put dots on a map, have that single pane of glass. All of our drone videos, our drone telemetry is pumping into our TAC server. So we're able to see where our drone's at on the map. But at the same time, it's also pumping in ADS-B data. At the same time, we can also have TAC running on the onboard computers on our helicopters so that they're pumping their telemetry into there as well. So you have this single pane of glass that allows us to, for our pilots especially, and our air bosses that are managing that scene, to be able to see where everything is at without flipping between, multiple windows, multiple screens. That's just going to bog that process down. So that's been one of the big components that has been beneficial for us.
Thank you. It's interesting because there are so many people on this panel that I know you all. And, Texas DPS probably has the most, bar none, squared away TAC integration that I've seen. Your guy, Jared Vanden Heuvel, has done an unbelievable job. He's actually been on my live stream called All Things TAC with Robert Cameron and Jason. And just the extent that you guys are using TAC is unbelievable. What's also interesting talking about deconfliction is just this morning I was texting with Chief Werner about a article that he put out about having a light on top of your drone so that it doesn't conflict with what your light is doing underneath the drone should you be indoors or need some brightness. And so I'm actually going to do a little bit of research on some of the best lights that can be put up on top of drones so that before we have ADS-B and the other things we need to make that happen, that could be a quick slap on fixer, I think. In addition to that, that was a strobe light I wanted to mention. Brandon, about deconfliction, he put out a wonderful white paper that I just received and read about what a John Q. Public or a commercial company can do towards protecting yourself in the last moment if you need to with a drone. But I know that he is an expert in helping commercial industries. So here in Pennsylvania, I have a trucking company with quite a lot of trucks and a big yard, a cement factory that hopefully I'll be contacting Brandon about shortly because they need his protection. So yeah, and then of course, Michelle and I talk several times a week. So it's great to see you all. As far as TAC goes, it really presents that common operating picture. So I know that Texas DPS has a really great way of getting other agencies onto their TAC server should there be a multi-agency event where people need to get onto it and see that common operating picture. And that's something that we're doing here. I moved out to the Poconos to Northeast Pennsylvania about 10 weeks ago. And there are 8 volunteer fire departments in various townships that have neither drones nor TAC. And they're still using radios. And they're doing everything that, you know, a regular fire department would do. And they're grossly under-teched in that way. And so definitely looking forward to bringing them up on it. We've already discussed it with the Mutual Aid Society here in Northeast Pennsylvania. And it looks like they too see the value of TAC. So TAC is a game changer in every possible way. And I think everybody here knows that. So thank you.
Guys,
yeah.
How do we get the goodness of DPS into the sites of the Pennsylvania folks? Why is it that we are only within the state? We should be sharing that goodness outside the state. We're not yet at a national level. That's the national conference role. But state to state, we should be able to do that.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, this is a discussion we need to discuss a little bit further. But we have been talking, you and I had this talk after the national conference, that we were hoping that we were going to have a TAC sandbox up before now. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened as fast as I had hoped. But Drone Responders is looking to have a TAC sandbox where people can come in and actually see some of this stuff in action and be able to play with it so they can learn to see. Because what was inspiring to me was I was listening, we're not using TAC here in my community, but what was inspiring to me is they were using their CAD, and I was hearing them talk about a person that was out on a trail that needed to be helped. And they said, we put a pin on the map. You know, that's a huge difference from where we used to be. Now a person that's responding to the call can see on their CAD on the map, and take that TAC now from a coordinating standpoint for all these other things we're talking about becomes huge, because you can start defining all of your airspace assignments. So when you have a disaster, you can say, okay, you all are flying in this area, you're flying in this area, and so on. And people have this immediate view of where I can and can't fly. Yeah. So we need to work on that some more, and we'll have some more discussions.
Yeah, Drone Responders is definitely the location for that. I will tell you that since 2021, when I joined up, everything I've learned about ConOps, you know, about COAs, about how to get started in drones and anything came from Drone Responders. So that would be the ideal location for a TAC sandbox. And if there's any way I can help you, Chief, let me know, and I'd be happy to do so.
Yeah, so I was talking to Corey Foy, and so far haven't gotten a heavy response back from him. I think he's being hit all directions at once.
He really is.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I'm going to have to step on him a little bit more and raise myself to a higher level.
So Michelle, I want to go back to your question that you asked, like, how do we get it to, like, you know, Pennsylvania, Philly, Pittsburgh, or some of those major urban, and I think Charles answered that question earlier in the cast, which was, you know, taking the show home to other locations, right, on the road. And so having a Drone Responders, maybe a regional conference or something in that Philly,
that's different, right? The regional concept is different than what we're doing right now, which is standing up state level drone responder groups. Sure. To work within, to try and mature them within the state. Absolutely necessary. I love that. That is boots on the ground, and we need it.
Yeah.
But when we have such varying levels of maturity across the United States, why are we not taking some of those more mature state representatives, programs, departments, and having them do a little cross-pollination training with some of these other nascent states who, you know, they want to get a drone program because it's cool, or they just don't know what they don't know yet.
Well, and I think that's why going to these states as an icebreaker with the conference type setting where you can have panels, you can have so those interactions and those relationships can build or will start at that level, right? And then the follow-on conversations are what's going to be great. I think the unfortunate truth is about why Texas can't educate Pennsylvania is largely it's just not their job. And so they're not going to go to Pennsylvania because that's not their ultimate responsibility. Their responsibility is to Texas. Now, Pennsylvania could come and say, hey, can you help us? And I'm sure that they would gladly do that. But at the end of the day, it's going to take the Pennsylvania to reach out and say, can you help? And that, I think, is where it might start. But yeah,
I think things have started going that way. There's been a lot of I can speak from what has happened here within our agency. There's been a lot of folks that have been reaching out from other states to us through our Jared that's managing the program, and we've had I don't know, probably less than a month ago we had some folks from New York State that were here trying to figure out what we were doing with our drone and with our TAC program. We've always got folks from across the country coming in to audit our UAS training program, right? So there's outreach happening. To your point, Brandon, you're right. We just don't have the time and the resources to go around to all these other states and try to train them and build their programs up and their TAC service, whatever it is. But we're always open to have folks come in and learn from what we're doing. To help them out and take that stuff back.
And I end up taking calls every day from agencies asking for help, and then I will connect them with what I try to do is to connect them with somebody close to them that's similar to them so that they can talk to somebody that's on the same page, as opposed to you don't want to send a more rural area to New York City because it's totally different. So I do that. But the other part is a lot of people don't even know that Drone Responders is out there still.
right.
We're a free organization. Membership is free. All our resources are free. And that's why we do the conferences that we've done so far. We do with AUVSI as a co-located event. Not that it's one of our major events, but it gets us closer to where some of the people are. It's just like Commercial UAV Expo is in Vegas. It gets us into another area that's nearby, or the Energy Robotics Summit. It got a lot of people there. We were able to connect with people in those localities. So we're trying to do that. Our goal over time is to have a state chapter in every state, and then from those state chapters to coordinate even smaller regional events that actually they coordinate themselves as to what's needed within their particular state. So that's the longer range goal of Michelle said, of boots on the ground, getting to where they are, because that's what we hear over and over again is we can't afford to travel. We've got to be able to be close by, and we need to talk to people that look like us.
And I think, go ahead, Zev.
I was just going to mention on the TAC side, until it gets up on Drone Responders, which would be the best place for it to be. There is a wonderful website and person, AJ, who his website is.
Oh, you lose Zev.
Oh, right when he's about to give us the important link.
Am I back? Okay.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
That's internet in the Poconos, folks.
Everything's slower and much more humid out here than Arizona. But it's called the taxsyndicate.com, and it's AJ's location. It is also, so it's a website, but it's also a channel on YouTube. He literally has step-by-step programs to get you spun up from the moment you see the letters TAK to actually bringing in other agencies and plugins and data downloads, and it's amazing. So it's a great place to start.
Hey, Zev,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a favor. How about reaching out to him to see if we can work with him to do this sandbox? And I know there's Michael Light. There's another person out in California.
Right, yeah. They're both out of Corona.
Yeah. So if you could reach out to them and see if we can pull them in to help get this sandbox going.
Absolutely would love to do that. In addition to that, there are folks out there that literally have tax servers that are willing to give you access to the tax server as a sandbox to send you out certifications and so on. So, the community is really banding together in a great way. And I understand why. What happened with the Granite Mountain hotshots and at the Yarnell disaster, that really motivated a lot of the firefighters to, how can we make sure that we don't just rely on radios, that we're getting static and we don't know where they are.
So I want to back up just a touch, because everything this whole world exists, but if you don't know that world exists, you don't know to ask for it, right? And I think that's one of the biggest struggles we're having right now is, and it's getting so much better. Over the last 2 years have seen just such a phenomenal explosion in this chatter and this talk, because it's kind of like going viral as to this whole UAS DFR, all this stuff that exists, because now companies are wanting to sell DFR, and they're very, very good at marketing to the people that they want to sell to. So that's starting initially the conversation. But if I'm in rural Montana or, you know, some of these other areas, how do you even know, right? And so one of the things I've been trying to do is not go to the drone oriented conferences and go to the ones that are like Maritime Security West out in Long Beach. I'll be heading to, and it's about maritime security ports, and it's just I'm a segment in that to try and talk about drones that to those who may not necessarily understand. So like the International Association of the Chief of Police, I think, is another great maybe potential avenue to have you know, like a drone responders booth or something at this event, to maybe tag up with some folks that may not know that what they don't know. Food for thought.
So I can tell when you all go to conferences and you tell about drone responders, because I immediately see all the people that start signing up for drone responders, because I see every one of them, and I send a message out to every single person that joins. But some of the problems we have are actually those national organizations, because they want to keep things siloed. I'm on the ICP Aviation Committee.
Okay.
And unfortunately, to get things out there promoted about drone responders is another organization. And a lot of these organizations that I've been involved with are looking for money.
Yeah.
They want to have money in to sponsor anything that's available. Well, we're free, so we're not paying big money to come in and be something with these groups. But you all going to these different types of events and sharing about drone responders is helpful, because then it immediately opens up people to this bigger thing. Of course, I get a lot more phone calls, but it's a good problem to have.
Notice we give them your email address.
Yeah, I do ask, and they go, it's Michelle, it's Brandon. I'm like, okay, gotta put them on my list of.
No Christmas card for you.
No, I'm going to send you.
He's got her pictures.
Christmas card.
He's got her pictures on a wall with a bunch of dart holes in it.
How did you see that?
So as we're talking about this, one of the items that Josh had on his list today for us was to talk about layered protections. And I think initially we were talking about the technology layers, but I think what we have been talking about today is educational layers and outreach layers are just as important as the tech, because if we don't get common understanding of how to use the technology, boy, that gets us in trouble.
It goes on to that. In addition, it's relationships. Zeph kind of hit this, and Aaron hit this. Is we have to first develop the relationships so that we can actually have a reception to the awareness we're trying to bring forward. Is we're here to help. We're not trying to tell you what to do. It's like with interoperability. After 9/11, we identified interoperability issues. We went through and identified networks and all that stuff. You got to build. It's got to be continuous. If you're not doing those networks, it just goes away. And so that's the first part. But the rest of it's like you're saying. It's awareness. It's education. It's.
So, Aaron, how do you guys keep up with all of this? I mean, you've been doing this for a minute now, and like Charles is saying, it's a constant upkeep. You have to continue to be doing the outreach and making those new connections, but also sustaining the old ones, so that you have like equity in maturity levels of all of your partners. How do you keep up with all that? Going back to what Brandon said earlier, where is that really your job? You really do have a primary job, and this is distracting. How do you guys do it?
It's a challenge. That's the easiest way to say it. It's a challenge. So yeah, I mean, I've got my primary job. We're trying to run a program, but at the same time, we're trying to keep these relationships. We're trying to build new relationships. We're trying to go out there and provide information, education, training, and everything else to others. Right? We've got our program into a pretty good spot we're trying to maintain the best we can at this point. And it, kind of once we've gotten to that, we're like, okay, well, we've got a ton of other agencies, especially here in Texas, that are trying to do the same thing. Let's, do our best to try to get them the information and the training and everything they need to get kind of up to the same level. Now, by all means, I'm not saying we're the best out there. We've just been doing this for a while. We've learned a lot of lessons, and we try to share that as much as possible. But yeah, it's a challenge. There's a lot of time that I spend that's not paid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a
So
lot of
this is-
personal time of doing things, and there's a lot of times I go to stuff that I'm off duty, right? I'm not a part of this agency that I work for, and I'm not being paid by anybody else. I'm just there to share information, right? So
that's not a sustainable answer, right? We can't ask people to do this stuff on their own time, other than Charles. But Charles, maybe this is something that we should be thinking about. How do we relieve some of the pressure on these various departments, because they do have their main mission, and this ain't it. So is there a way for us to allow them to focus on their mission while we look around in the periphery for these kinds of things that maybe we as drone responders can help support those activities for them?
Yeah, and I think it's also incumbent to try to figure different ways of communicating to larger groups to allow them to know of what's available, so that there are some resources they can take advantage of if they're looking to learn, like Drone Responders, which is free. So it's looking at ways that we can communicate that message. What a lot of people don't realize is there's about 1.2 million firefighters. Out of that 1.2 million firefighters, 70% of them are volunteer.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of volunteer fire departments across the country that have very little knowledge about this, have little knowledge. And until recently, some of the things they couldn't even do until we made regulatory changes. Like now we have the public safety obstructed shielding, where they can file a mile beyond visual line of sight as a volunteer fire department, where you couldn't do that before. So there's a lot of changes. We've had, timing was right. We had this whole thing of how effective a federal agency is, and the DOJ and the White House all want to know that it is really the evolution of DFR. Why these regulations change is because all those combinations of pressures came together at the same time. So we just got to figure out how to get those messages out on a broader scale.
I think as we're kind of getting towards the end, I thought maybe one kind of group or stakeholder we haven't talked about too much, which I'd love to get Aaron and the rest of the crew's insight on, is the public. I know so there can be a lot of public backlash to a drone program if it's not done well, or public outcry, or just people see a drone and they're kind of nervous about it, not sure what's going on. Aaron, would you mind just speaking a little bit about, you guys probably have one of the more successful drone programs. How have you communicated that to folks?
Hey, if I just want to throw one real quick thing. Yeah. So I think the other thing that is going to be really critical is having a champion inside of the FAA. With the recent retirements of Mike O'Shea, Kerry Fleming, and some of these other folks, who is going to fill that role and fill in those massive shoes within the federal agency to push and advocate on behalf of that, because drone responders can do from what they can do, but we need that federal backing still in order to advocate within the department, right, within that federal space for these types of things. And I don't know who that is. Maybe Charles, you have some information, but we're Mike O'Shea is and Kerry and some of the other folks that have been very passionately involved with this. Those are huge losses, and we really hope that someone else can backfill that important role.
I am glad to say I do have those connections. I do have those connections
Awesome.
with people.
We should
Very
advocate for getting John Meehan some partners in the other services.
Agree.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No problem. That was a really good point, Brian. But yeah, just because we're running out of time, I just really would like. I heard you guys mentioning this at the conference, and I thought it was important. We talked a lot about the government, other drone programs, kind of hit a lot of the other big stakeholders, but I think the public at large is probably one of the biggest stakeholders that you really have to have on your side to get the FAA to put more resources to get the president of Congress on your side. You need the voting public. So tell us a little bit, Aaron, about what you guys have done to secure the public's trust.
It's about being transparent, right? Making sure that it's a little bit challenging for us as Texas DPS because we cover such a large area, right? The entire state of Texas, so it's hard to get that outreach to everybody. But it starts really with the local areas, right? You've got a state trooper that's in a rural part of the state, right? That person that is a drone pilot, that state trooper that's a drone pilot, he goes out to the community events, right? He goes out to the church events, to the national night outs, to the schools, right? And he talks to them about drones. Hey, this is what we do with drones. We do this, in the Austin area. We do it all across the state. It's going out and being visible at these events and just talking to people, talking to the public, saying, show them their drones, right? We'll set up a table with different drones on them, and we'll have them up in the air on tethers or just flying up in the air, live streaming down to a TV. What's always funny is you have those events where you're live streaming down to a TV, and what happens is all the kids come over, and the kids are dancing and having a good old time seeing themselves on TV. But what that does, that draws in the parents, right? And then you have the conversations with the parents, and you talk to them about, what law enforcement or what public safety is doing with the technology. The fact that we're not out there spying on people. We're not out there conducting, all this crazy surveillance on people. We're using it for good, right? We're out there doing search and rescue missions. We're out there using it for reconstruction on motor vehicle collisions and clearing roads quicker. We're helping with disaster response. We're saving lives by dropping personal flotation devices to people that are out there in the water, right? Those are the things that we are doing with this stuff. It's not anything to be scared about, right? So it's being transparent with the people within your jurisdiction, right? So going out and being visible, show them what you do, show them the technology. And then that's where you get that buy-in.
I'll just add, we have a community outreach program in our resource center that you can customize that actually came from Fairfax. A lot of places that start without doing that have to stop and start over again. And that means town hall meetings. And you've got to make sure that your elected officials are educated, that they're informed, and they have hands-on. But do those town hall meetings, do the school presentations. Like you said, have the kids. Get the kids, bring the parents. That's your key to the elected officials. But also be sure to tell what you're doing with the drones, what you're not going to be doing with the drones. That your SOPs and policies and procedures are like Chula Vistas. They're online, that people can see them. And the one key issue is we are concerned about privacy, and we are not doing random surveillance. Those are the key things. And what we try to make sure that we do is follow as much as we can of the ACLU suggestions as far as drones, so that we're being responsible in that particular arena.
And I think the other good thing about that, whenever you're having those conversations with the parents, those are normally the ones that have gone out and bought a drone for themselves for birthday or Christmas, right? And now you are educating them on what they can and cannot do with the drone, hopefully making that airspace safer, because the vast majority of the folks that go out there on the civilian side that just buy a drone for fun, they don't understand all the rules and regulations, right? They never have gone to the FAA side. So what you're doing is that's giving you the opportunity to educate them and hopefully, improve the safety of that national airspace system.
Agreed.
Definitely. Well, that was, I feel like, a really good encapsulation of that panel that you guys did, Aaron. And we really appreciate coming on and joining the discussion. I feel like we can get very theoretical, into like a lot of the policy and the bigger vision, but it's always great having people on the ground doing the good work and bringing your perspective to the panel. So definitely really appreciate that perspective and you coming on. And Zev, really thank you for jumping on with your questions and insight, and Charles. And thank you everybody for joining the podcast today. And definitely tune in on Tuesday and Thursday next week for some more great information on drones.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.